After the stock market crash of 1929, America delved into a seemingly endless economic depression. In the first years of the Depression, over 5,000 banks collapsed and thousands of people lost their homes. President Herbert Hoover was in office during the beginning of the Depression. When the stock crashed, he cut income taxes and lowered interest rates to encourage borrowing money to spend on recovery projects. However, he became known as the man who would pay for grain for starving animals, but not food for starving people. Because of Hoover's inability to admit the economic crisis, temporary shanty towns began popping up which bore his name. Hoovervilles, as they were called, were towns made of tin or cardboard shacks inhabited by the people who had lost everything and became hopeless. Bread lines and soup kitchens formed, and people even began selling apples on the street for 5 cents. Newspapers became Hoover blankets, worn-out shoes were dubbed Hoover shoes, and empty pockets were known as Hoover flags.
So what caused the Great Depression? One main factor was overproduction. Times actually were known as the Great Glut and Plague of Plenty. The Hawley-Smoot Tariff passed June 17, 1930, raised U.S. tariffs on over 20,000 imported goods. This was the second highest tariff passed in the U.S. ever. The Depression continued to worsen. People wanted work, but there was no work. If man didn't cause enough disaster for themselves, Mother Nature began to step in. There was a drought that scorched lands, so thousands of farms were sold at auctions for taxes. The Dust Bowl came and caused families to stand around wearing protective masks, watching their farms swirl by. The drought plus wind caused dust storms, while all seemed to be failing. A new president, Franklin Roosevelt, was elected to office. He was inaugurated March 4, 1933, for FDR served the most terms of any president.
When Roosevelt was elected, he came in with promises of a new deal for the forgotten man. A famous quote from Roosevelt's inauguration speech was the line, "Let me assert my firm belief that the only thing we have to fear is fear itself." FDR declared that we needed to handle the war on depression like a war with an enemy. March 6th through 10th became banking holiday, in which banks were closed so they could be reopened securely. The New Deal advocated the 3 R's, relief, recovery, and reform. The first 100 days of FDR's presidency were ingeniously dubbed as the first 100 days, where Congress and Roosevelt tried to lessen some of the damage. FDR turned to radio and held 30 fireside chats in which he tried to give reassurance. FDR passed a list of acts that were known for their acronyms as New Deal alphabet soup.
The 100 Days Congress responded to FDR with the Civilian Conservation Corps. This provided employment for 3 million uniformed men in government camps. They participated in reforestation, firefighting, flood control, and swamp drainage. The first major effort to recovery was the Federal Emergency Relief Act. It called for immediate relief rather than long-range recovery. There was a man named Huey P. Kingfish Long, who was a senator from Louisiana, who at first was a supporter of the New Deal, but later came to oppose it. Long established a share our wealth program and wanted to make every man a king. Every family was to receive $5,000, however at the expense of the prosperous. Fear of Long becoming a fascist dictator came to an end when he was assassinated in 1935. In 1935, the Social Security Act and the Wagner National Labor Relations Act were passed. Both were to make the people feel more secure. Unfortunately, for the first term from 1933 to 1937 did not cure the Depression. Widespread unemployment continued to persist through 1936. In 1937, the economy took another downward turn. There was a depression within the Depression, and it started becoming known as the Roosevelt Recession.
By 1938, the New Deal had lost most of its spark. Crisis continued through 1938 and 1939 as foes of the New Deal found pleasure in pointing out its faults and contradictions. People accused America of turning to the Bolshevik Marxist image under Roosevelt's. Heart newspapers declared the Red New Deal with a Soviet seal endorsed by Moscow hand the strange result of an alien cult. In a liberty-loving land, FDR also was accused of being Jewish and was called Rosenfield, and was said to have actually created the Jew Deal. National debt skyrocketed. In 1932, the debt was $19,487,000,000. By 1939, the debt was $40,440,000,000. The U.S. was said to have stood for unlimited spending. In the end, the New Deal failed to cure the Depression. Afloat in a sea of red ink, it had only administered aspirin, sedatives, and band-aids. With visions of the Second World War ahead, neutrality was endorsed. FDR gave the quarantine speech in 1937 that pushed to quarantine the aggressors, the Axis powers, Italy, Germany, and Japan. The economic embargoes. Americans stayed in isolation mode until forced into action when Japan bombed Pearl Harbor December 7, 1941. FDR was quoted to say, "This is a date which will live in infamy."